Hi everybody, Eric Dorward here with the Spartan Rocketry Club, continuing our quick build, hopefully, of the Estes Mini Mean Machine. Now, the next step here, we're already to the point where we're going to attach the fins. So in the first video, motor mount built, done. We're not going to use that this video, probably not. The fins, I have finished rounding all of them, so they are ready to go. I also took one of these body tubes and I marked off the lines for fin and launch lug attachments. The other one, it's ready to go too, I guess, but it's not going to have anything glued to it. So the next thing I need to do, and the only real thing I need to do in preparation for attaching the fins, is I need to mark off where everything goes. So the one thing I did do is when the instructions tell you when you're marking these fins off, and by the way, if you are unfamiliar how to do this, the easiest way is where there's a little diagram, you tape it to this, you mark things off, and then the best way is to go get a door jamb. So go over, find a door, and use the door jamb to help you draw straight lines on a tube. Otherwise, it is fairly difficult to draw straight lines on a tube. It's not the easiest thing to do. The instructions suggest that you should label everything. I don't really find that to be necessary because all of the lines except for one are for fins. So I only took the time to mark the one for the launch lug and I put a little L here. Truthfully, I didn't really need to do that either because the launch lug is the one that's going to be in between two other fin lines. So it's the one that's going to be closest to two other lines. But let's just say for the time being that you didn't know that. Well, that's fine. Label it with an L. Anyway, on the launch lug, and I'm not quite following the instructions in direct order right now, but this is going to be helpful down the road. The launch lugs are going to go at 1 inch and 8.5 inches from the end. So let's try to mark that off now. These don't need to be terribly precise, but if you're taking the time to grab a ruler, you might as well do a good job. Wow, that's annoying. This tube is actually quite small and makes this little trick difficult to pull off. All right, I'm not going to put any weight on it this time. Okay, so there's my 1 inch mark on the launch lug, and 8.5 inches is going to be about up here. That's great. Now, the fins are not going to go directly at the end of this rocket, because that's just not how it's designed. They are all going to be 1 inch up too as well. So I'm going to make 1 inch marks on all of the lines, apparently, not just the launch lug line. Try to do this as accurately as possible for the fins because while it doesn't truly matter all that much where the fins are precisely, you do want them all at the same distance from the end. So accurately measure 1 inch on each of these. So when we attach them, they will all be staggered at the same distance away from the end. Okay. Go. Should have one more to do here. Okay. All right, that should be all the marking that I need to do. And just looking at it quickly, they look pretty accurate. All right, so ruler can go away. The last thing that we're going to do in this video anyway is get those fins on. This, not entirely sure how this is going to go, honestly. One thing that you might consider doing, I don't think I'm going to do it this time. This is a pretty waxy feeling tube. And you know what, now that I'm saying it, let's just give it a go. Get yourself a piece of sandpaper and just lightly sand along that line that you've made to try to get some of that glaze off. Now I'm going to not get rid of the hash mark that I put in for the distance. And I'm going to try to actually underestimate the length of the fin because I'm using this line to center, and if I go too far, it'll be hard to center it properly. But taking some of the coating on this tube off is going to it'll allow the glue to latch on a little bit better. I'm not going to worry about the launch lug. That shouldn't really be an issue. But there we go. All right. Yeah, I could probably go a little bit further. Okay. Hopefully that slightly scored up, not scarred up, tube now will be able to hold the glue a little bit better. All right. Things I need include my wood glue, my scrap here, and I'm going to use a dowel to help spread it out. The typical construction method that I use for these is I'm going to put a thin layer of glue on here. I'm going to spread it out with my dowel. Didn't really go on particularly evenly there, but that's not a big deal. Okay. Yeah, that's probably like the minimum. Probably should have used a little bit more, but I'm going to let this sit, and I'm going to let the glue start to tack up on its own. And then I'm going to put a second layer of glue on here in a little bit, make sure that's spread out thin. That I want even less glue than the first time. Having 2 layers of glue makes the bond stronger for reasons that I don't fully understand, but that's okay. You know, I've never actually done experimental material science on these to fully understand why that's the case, but apparently it is. And this is just kind of a default good idea gluing technique. So that's probably enough time. I'm going to gently apply a little bit more glue. Okay. And again, spread that out evenly. Right, that's pretty good. All right, now it is time to attach. So I'm going to try to get the back end of the fin lined up right at that mark that I made. And then I'm going to roll it forward and try to do my best to make sure that it is centered on the line that I've drawn. I'm going to hold it here for a good 30 seconds or so for the glue to start to set up. If this isn't exactly right, and you could probably see better than I can right now how accurate this is, but if it's not particularly accurate after 30 seconds or so, I can kind of nudge it to get it to where it ought to be. I'm not shooting for perfection right off the bat, but I do at least want to get it right at the back mark. I want that to be done correctly. All right, let's see how this looks. It looks pretty well centered back here. It's kind of hard to see. It's a little bit, I try to bump it a little bit to the left, or slide it, I guess I should say, in the back. It's not, it's better, but it's not quite good enough. Okay, and in doing so, I've adjusted the front as well, so that's fun. Okay. I'm going to brush off the excess glue here. And then I'm going to do a quick little check to see how close to vertical it is. This doesn't need to be perfect right off the bat. It looks pretty good. All right. I'm going to finalize, the vertical angle alignment later. It doesn't look quite right. This is just an eyeball test. We'll do a real test a little bit later. Now, this thing is definitely going to want to roll over. I want the fin vertical as I futz around with the next one. So I'm going to use a sanding block and just another object that's off camera to just hold things in place with that fin more or less straight up and down while I move on to the next ones. The first one is usually the easiest because there's not much you have to worry about. There aren't any other fins on, and if it's not quite right, you don't need to worry that the other fins are going to fall over while you are working on that first one. But all the subsequent ones, they get increasingly more difficult because there's more stuff to consider. The good news is that you don't need to rush through this. In fact, there's not a lot of benefit to it. You shouldn't just stop and walk away and come back and attach the other fins later, because you do want them at least slightly mobile by the time they're all on there, so you can adjust the alignment as necessary. But you don't need to do it very, very quickly. And in fact, you are rewarded by not doing it super quickly, because while I'm doing this, the glue on the other fin that's already on the rocket is continuing to set. And the longer it takes in between attaching fins, the more time the glue has had to set up, and the less likely you are that you're going to bump it, or it's just going to flop over due to gravity. All right, so speaking of flopping over due to gravity, here is the next fin. Now this, unfortunately, I don't want to anyway have the fin down like this, because there's a good chance that I'm going to let it roll and I'm going to bump it. So I'm going to have to do this in the air. I've got finger from my left hand holding things up here, and I'm going to do the same business that I did last time. I'm going to find that point, and then I'm going to roll forward, and then I'm going to hold it in place before I worry about making sure that this is aligned at all. By the way, the only thing that I'm kind of concerned about here is I'm pushing down fairly hard with my right hand. I'm pushing back up with my left hand. What I don't want to do, and this is unusual to this rocket, is I don't want to be like pushing down with the heel of my right hand and deforming the body tube, because it's so long. It's off the ground, and I don't want to like bow it by putting weight at one end and not at the other. And well, both ends, I guess, really, and then bowing the middle out. All right, that's pretty wobbly. But let's check the alignment here. The back looks pretty good. Front's off a little bit. That's a very small adjustment that needs to be made there. I'm going to wipe the glue out. By the way, that act of wiping the glue, I have knocked off fins by just ever so slightly touching the root edge, if I didn't wait long enough. All right, checking the angle. Again, I'm just looking down the barrel. And now you have at least some frame of reference here. So it'd be nice if this looked vertical and it looked like it was about at a 90-degree angle to the fin you've already got on there. You can actually go back to that first fin and adjust it a little bit if you think that maybe it's the culprit. Because these guys, they do not look like they are aligned up properly. That's okay. All right. Next. So again, I'm going to put this off to hold it in place. This time though, I'm going to set it like this. This is the fresh one. I want that one. Is that the fresh one? Yeah, that's the fresh one. Anyway, that one I want to be held at vertical, because this one the glue is the strongest on right now. So it can take being held at a parallel to the ground better than the other one could. I could, of course, rotate it so that they are both at like 45-degree angle, but I don't really think there's a lot of benefit in doing that. I think that the one I attached first, can deal with it, and I'd like to give the one I just attached a little bit more time to set. So again, glue on, waiting a little bit, 30 seconds or so before adding the next layer. The more fins, the more complicated this gets. Tricky to attach without jostling things that you've already attached. So you're probably going to be tempted to rush through this, like I really want to get this on there. But patience here is definitely going to be rewarded. There's no real benefit to you getting this done, to getting all the fins attached as quickly as possible. You just have wet glue everywhere. Yeah, I guess it's easier to adjust things, but you're not going to have completely set fins one way or the other, so it shouldn't be much of an issue. All right, this is the most recent one. It is the most fragile. Unfortunately, now it needs to go it needs to be parallel to the ground, and that's going to mean it might flop over. I'm going to do my best to not touch it in any way, shape, or form. Okay, I've got the back end of the fin in the right place, it looks like. Rolled it forward, holding it for about 30 seconds. Because there are 4 fins here, you should have 2 pairs of fins that are vertically aligned to each other. So once this one goes on, it should be a bit easier. Again, it's going to get progressively easier to see if my alignment is correct with regard to like it's how vertical it is. So that's reassuring. Of course, I still have to worry about this guy and making sure it doesn't fall over while I am messing with things. All right, glue is been on for 30 seconds or so. I need to adjust the front end of this a little bit. That's pretty good. The back looks back looks okay, I guess. That's kind of hard to tell. Looking down, it's close to vertical. Let's get rid of the excess glue. There we go. Do be careful when you're brushing off the excess glue. Can't tell you how many times that's been the offender and the thing that knocks the fin off when I go and brush away the glue. All right, so I'm checking now the vertical alignment between the pair of fins that are 180 degrees away from each other. They look pretty solid. The middle fin, I'm trying to eyeball it to make sure that it's at about 90 degrees at a right angle relative to those two. I'm going to do final work on that later, but that looks pretty good for the time being. Now, unfortunately, I could stand this up vertically, which might not be a bad idea, but I'm going to trust in my gluing and just sit it like that for the time being while I get the 4th and final fin queued up here. I don't really think that that's likely to flop off. The good news about this particular kit, the fin design, is that the fins have a good amount of surface area for their weight, so you have a good amount of glue holding them where they ought to be, and they're not particularly heavy. So both of those things are working in our favor. If you have particularly bulky fins or ones that have fairly small anchor points, so root edges, that will work against you. But this kit seems to be pretty well balanced. These are pretty classic fin shapes. This trapezoidal fin shape is well, it's certainly easy to make, and it works quite well. It's not optimal efficiency for aerodynamics, but it's surprisingly good considering if you wanted to make fins, trapezoidal fins are some of the easiest, or one of the easiest options for you to generate. All right, second layer of glue is in place, should be ready to go. Again, this is the trickiest one because there are now 3 other fins in place to avoid. And while most of them are pretty well anchored, they are not indestructible. All right. I'm having a harder time seeing where everything is with this particular last one for a variety of reasons. But again, doesn't need to be perfect right off the bat. The better, the more accurately you do it, great. But you can still make little minor adjustments without ruining the whole process. So a good 30 seconds holding this in place. Make any final adjustments to the orientation at which I've attached it, and then we will do the check for vertical alignment. All right, that should probably be good. I'm gonna smooth out my glue here. Front looks good. That looks pretty good. Back looks pretty good. And then let's check for alignment here. All right, so the ones that I currently have, top and bottom, are not particularly well aligned with each other. I feel like, I'm not entirely sure which one's the offender. I feel like the bottom one probably is, but that looks better. Not perfect, but better. All right, now it's time to do the final alignment check. So I'm going to put this down, and this kit actually, some of the Estes kits have alignment marks for you to check, but this one, for whatever reason, does not. Fortunately, I happen to have, my cutting board has rectangles drawn into it. So I'm going to try to do my best to center the tube over one of the intersections here, and then I can use the grid line as a guide. This is actually harder than you would think, because I can't actually see like the grid line down looking down the barrel of the rocket, but I can use the fins as kind of a somewhat of a guide. All right, so they look pretty good, honestly. I don't think they need a whole lot of adjustment. It's nice to at least have some kind of like check on what you've done earlier when you were just eyeballing it. But overall, I don't think that there's any particular need here. One thing I do want to check, I'm just going to look down the barrel at these to make sure that they aren't skewed this way. And that would happen if the front and the back weren't properly aligned. One of them looked a little wonky when I was looking down from the top, but I don't see it this way. It looks pretty consistent. All right, so I would say that this is ready to just dry. Now, the fin tip here is really close to the back end of the tube here. If it were just the tube, I would have some hesitance about leaving it like this for fear that it would fall over. But then again, I don't really want, I don't want it to list this way and then put any weight on that one particular fin. So I think I'm going to go to my classic approach to resolving this problem. And I'm going to use a glue bottle, and I'm just going to put the rocket right over top. That way it can list if it wants to that way, but all the fins are, they're just floating out freely in space. It would be preferable if this would stand upright. That's actually kind of hard to do for a variety of reasons, but be that as it may, it can lean over all at once. It's not going to mess anything up. All right, so that takes care of that. I really want this to dry fully before I move on to the next step. There isn't much left in the construction process here, but this is going to have to wait at least half an hour to make sure the glue is very firmly set, because I don't need anything foolish happening when I attach the launch lugs. All right, so thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video.